Hello. Um, we're starting today on a new book, and it's the first book of the Bible, Genesis. And I'm going to take a good couple of weeks to go through this. We're still in a bit of a mess here, but as you can see, some things are back. It's a good job you're not looking that way because it's a mess. But the weather, it's been a bit rainy, but it's okay. As I said, we're going to start on Genesis, and we're going to work up to meet sort of in the middle. Because I sort of assumed that's where we'd want to meet and complete the Old Testament and go from there. The reason I'm taking a couple of weeks on Genesis is Genesis has a lot. Hiya, John. Now that shelf looks tidy. Yeah, I know. I've taken quite a bit of time sorting all my CDs out into alphabetical order, and that's just A to G. The rest is over there and upstairs. But there we are, and that's me and Andrea in the Moulin Rouge, where we went about 20 years ago. What was I saying? Oh yeah, Genesis. The reason that I'm gonna take a bit of time. By the end of today, we'll have got all the way into Genesis 1 and 4 words in. But there's a lot to say about Genesis. It's arguably the most important book of the Bible, because it sets up the scene, it sets the stall, and in any good book, you've got to set the scene and the characters and everything, and that's what we're doing here with Genesis. So the Bible is not just one book. It's 66 books, and the name of the Bible comes from the word Biblia, which means library. Together it forms a history book, a history of our universe. But the history of the Bible starts earlier and finishes later than any other history book you'll find in the world. It begins with the beginning of our universe and goes on through the end of our universe and beyond. It's history written from God's perspective, from God's point of view. So it's history that's important to God. The events which affected him most deeply. And therefore, it's quite different from every other history. There are two themes. What has gone wrong with our world, and how can we put it right? Something has gone terribly wrong with our world. It's not a great place to live in on times. And the book of Genesis tells us what's gone wrong. And then the rest of the Bible tells us how it's going to be put right. It's one book to tell us what's gone wrong, and 65 books telling us how it's going to be put right. and only God can put it right, and he's going to do it by rescuing us from ourselves. And that's what the word redemption means. It means to be rescued. And all 66 books form part of this drama of redemption. The book of Genesis introduces us to the stage, the cast, the plot, and all of these of the great drama we call redemption. Without the first few chapters in Genesis, the rest of the Bible wouldn't make any sense at all. The Hebrew title for the book was In the Beginning, and from a Hebrew perspective, the books were written on scrolls, and the title was taken, from the first words of each book. So the first words of Genesis were in the beginning. When it was translated into Greek about 250 years ago, 250 years ago, Genesis 1 and 2 have got to be the most famous two chapters in the whole Bible, and possibly the most controversial. When it was translated 250 years before Jesus, I will be back. That was quick because Andrea's getting the door. When it was translated about 250 years before Jesus was born, they changed the name of Genesis, which means origin, like the origin of Spider-Man and the origin of species and whatnot. Here we have the origin of the sun and the moon and the stars and the earth itself, on which we live. We have the origin of plants and birds and fish and animals and humans. Here we have the origin of sex and marriage and family life, the origin of civilization and governments, arts and culture and sciences. Here we have the origin of sin and death and murder and war. We even have the origin of sacrifice, both of animals and humans. It's quite a remarkable book. And it deals with the ultimate questions like, where did our universe come from? Why are we here? And why does each of us have to die? These are the ultimate questions that we need answers to. Historians can't answer these questions because no historian was there to observe and record it happening. Science cannot tell us how it began. They can go back to the beginning, but they can't go back further than the beginning, and they cannot tell us why it began. They cannot find a purpose for us coming into being. Philosophers try to work out why there is evil, and they can only guess at why there is so much evil in the world. There is only one person who can answer all these questions, and that's God. When you open the book of Genesis, you are smacked with one question. Are you reading the results of human imagination or the results of divine inspiration? Does it just give us speculation, or does it give us the answers from the one and only person who was there? There are other accounts of creation, the Babylonian epic, for example, which is complicated, to say the least, and far less credible than the book of Genesis. This is something you have to decide. You have to decide whether this is man or God inspiring us. Before you enter this book. But science is based on steps of faith. And in science, you produce a hypothesis, a working theory, then you test it to see if it fits the facts. That's how science progresses. Therefore, faith is, in fact, science in its working. It's scientific in its working. We have faith, we test it to see if it's true, and we move on with more faith. Take a step of faith in Genesis. Assume it's God's answer, and then see if it fits the facts. There are two startling facts. One, what a wonderful world we live in. It's the most interesting planet in our solar system, and the more you watch nature programs on TV, the more wonderful it appears. And the second is, it's being ruined by those who live in it. Now, these are two facts which are all we have to live with. And we are becoming more and more conscious of our environment every day, and what we are doing to it. 100 different species are becoming extinct each day, and that effectively is down to us. We're destroying the world we live in. And the facts fit Genesis perfectly. It is the foundational book of the Bible. Most of it, if not all biblical truths, are here in Genesis. Genesis is called the seed plot of the Bible, where the seeds in Genesis come to fruition throughout the Bible. And Genesis is the key that unlocks the rest of the Bible. Have you ever wondered what the Bible would be like if it had started with Exodus? It would become a book of history about one people, not the whole human race. Because Genesis is there, and you were reading about yourselves, about life. You understand what makes you tick through reading Genesis. And why can't a person and it asks the question why you can't be a better person than you are. Have you ever wondered why life is such a moral struggle? Most people wish to be better than they are, but fail. Exodus wouldn't help you with understanding that. Genesis does help you with understanding this. You're reading about your ancestor, a man called Adam. The whole of the Old Testament is built on the book of Genesis and refers constantly to Adam and to Noah and Abraham and Jacob, who changed his name to Israel. It's like a sprouting tree that traces its roots back to Genesis. And by this time, it's a massive, massive oak tree with branches that stretch out far and wide, but its roots go back to Genesis. Genesis is quoted more in the New Testament than in the Old. All the major writers of the New Testament, all 8 of them, all refer to Genesis, as did Jesus. as Christians, we regard Jesus as God, and therefore as a truthful person. Jesus regarded all the people in Genesis as real and historical people, not legends and not myths. And if Jesus considered them real, then that's good enough for me. And Jesus claimed to be on speaking terms with Abraham. Jesus said, before Abraham was born, I am, and he was glad to meet me. Now, the Jews were saying, you're not 50, and you claim to know Abraham. But Jesus said, I was there. Do you trust Jesus? Then that's the truth. If you don't trust Jesus, then you have to cogitate about it. I love cogitate. It's an awesome word. Jesus was constantly endorsing the book of Genesis. When he was asked about divorce and remarriage, he took you back to Genesis 2. Genesis provides the key to the whole Bible. Without it, the rest of the Bible doesn't make any sense. You won't understand the cross if it wasn't for Genesis. Paul said, just as one man's disobedience brought death to the human race, then so too does one man's obedience bring life. That's the heart of the cross. But it's talking about Genesis 3. Therefore, if you don't believe the book of Genesis, you can't rely on the rest of the Bible. If Genesis is proven to be mistaken, then the rest of the Bible is shaken. And I know that rhymed. If Genesis is not true, then chance is our creator and the brute beasts are our ancestors. Therefore, it's not surprising that Genesis has been more under attack than any other book of the Bible. There are two prongs to this attack. The first prong is scientific. Young people facing biology lessons will come up with some major questions. And science has questioned over the years the order of creation, the speed of creation, the method of creation, the age of the earth, the origin of man, the extent of the flood, the age of people who lived before the flood, and much, much more. But behind that, there is a second thing. I would mute that it's a satanic attack. The devil hates two books more than any others in the Bible, Genesis and Revelation, because one describes his entrance into the world and the other his very undignified exit out of the world. He wants to keep people out of the early chapters of Genesis and the later chapters of Revelation. He wants to persuade them that Genesis is myth and Revelation is mystery, so that we leave them alone. Because if you can destroy people's faith in Genesis, then you destroyed people's faith in the whole Bible. There's no surprise that there's a lot of conversation about the book of Genesis. If you distrust this, you will discard the rest. How did the book of Genesis come to be written? It's one of 5 books. They form a unit, not so much in our Bible, but most definitely in the Jewish Bible. They are called the Pentateuch, Penta meaning 5, as in the Pentagon, 5-side. Or it's also called the Torah, which means instruction. The Jews believe these 5 books together from the makers, form the maker's instruction to get the most out of life. Jews read the Torah through every year, a bit at a time. And Jews, Christians, and even pagan historians believe Moses wrote these books. By Moses' time, the alphabet had replaced pictograms that prevailed in Egyptian times. Moses was a university-trained student. If you know Cleopatra's Needle in London, that and another needle stood at the entrance to the Egyptian university, and the other needle is in Rome. And they both stood at the entrance of the Egyptian university. So you can go up to Cleopatra's Needle and imagine that Moses saw that every morning when he was a teenager, and possibly even leaned against it, try and work out where. But that's just conjecture. So he had the education and the knowledge to compile these 5 books. At the end of Deuteronomy, Moses' death is recorded, so probably Joshua had added them to the end of the book. Now, Genesis ends 300 to 400 years before Moses was born. He lived during Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So he had the material for those. But where did he get the material for Genesis? People who do not write have phenomenal memories. To this day, tribes who do not write can tell you the history of their tribe, and they can tell you it in great detail, because it's passed on at night around the campfire from father to son. So an oral tradition would have been very strong. They would tell stories around the campfire, so that all would have it ingrained into them, especially when they became slaves in Egypt. They wouldn't have time to write all this down, so they constantly would tell the stories. And let's face it, what else would you have to do? They would want their children to know who they were descended from. And the 2 things that normally get passed down this way are family trees and genealogies. And Genesis is full of family trees and genealogies. There is one phrase which comes up 10 times in the book of Genesis, and it's these are the generations of, and this kind of thing is exactly what would have been passed down from memory to memory. The other thing that gets passed on are sagas, hero stories of great things that your ancestors have done. Most of Genesis is composed of these 2 things: stories about great heroes inspired, interspersed with family trees. So this is obviously a compilation of the stories of the slaves of Egypt. What else did he have to do when during the 40 years that they wandered around the desert? This is the story of Genesis, except for chapter 1, which could not have possibly been picked up that way. The first chapter 1 and chapter 2 verse 3, the chapters weren't, as I've said, part of God's original design, and they put in very odd places. So all of chapter 1 and chapter 2 verse up to verse 3 must have come directly from God. Maybe when Moses was up on the mountain, when he was getting the 10 Commandments, who knows. Most of the Bible did not come this way. God inspired men to write the Bible under their own temperament and memory, insight and outlook, to shape the world, overruled by his inspiration, by his spirit, so that the result would be what he wanted. Genesis through to Deuteronomy has Moses' signature style of writing on it. But Genesis 1 is a unique piece of literature. It's mathematically perfect. The first sentence is 7 words long. It has all the hallmarks of having come directly from God. It's alphabet numeracy, and the Hebrew alphabet also doubled as numbers. So A or Aleph would have been 1 and B2 and what have you. Going on our alphabet. So A to Z would have been 1 to 26. And that was their common way of counting. Scholars in Hebrew today spend years working on the perfection of the wording of the first chapter of Genesis. Genesis 1 is a unique piece of literature. You can imagine Moses gathering all these stories together and then God saying, okay, I'm going to write the introduction. God wrote the beginning and the end of the Bible, because Revelation was not written it was physically written down by John, but it wasn't out of John's imagination, but rather dictated by God. He would show John visions and tell him, write that down. At the beginning and the end of the Bible, you have things that at the time no man could ever have dreamed up. In Psalm 103 it says, God made known his ways to Moses. In Genesis 1 you were listening to God speaking. You're almost standing on holy ground. There is one thing that states that Moses wrote this down, and it is not known before the time of Moses. There is no trace that the Sabbath came into being until the time of Moses. There is no trace that Abraham, Isaac or Noah were taking a day off a week. In fact, there is no trace of a week. Everything is in months by the moon and years by the sun. There is no trace of a week. Because we have Genesis at the beginning of our Bible, we assume that Adam knew this and worked on a weekly basis. We're wrong. He had a 7-day working week. Every day was working, looking after the garden. And Abraham, Isaac and Jacob were herdsmen, and cows don't take Sabbaths. They don't take any time off at all. It is from Moses that the Sabbath becomes a feature of life. God revealed this to Moses and said he had taken off one day, the 7th day, the Sabbath day. And when Moses gave the commandment to respect the Sabbath day, he added the explanation, because God created the world and then took a rest. And if this is new, as if this is new knowledge to the people at that time. So that is proof that Genesis 1 is dictated to Moses and was not known before Moses' day. We will start by looking at the first 4 words of the Bible. I know, first 4 words, rather than a chapter or a whole book, the first 4 words. The first 4 words are, in the beginning, God. Genesis is full of beginnings apart from God. God doesn't begin here. God is already when the Bible opens. He was there when the universe came into being. He has always been there. There has to have been an eternal someone or something to have brought our universe into being. Go on. 51. Nothing never turned into something by itself. That is a scientific proof. There has to be a cause. Either an eternal something or an eternal someone. The Bible begins by saying it's an eternal someone, God. And God never was made, God was always there. And that's what our brains have trouble with, the concept of eternity. We have real angst about the fact that God was always there. And God will always be there. You have to say he was always there, or like Aristotle, it was always there. But you have to choose one or the other. It's the fundamental assumption of the Bible that God exists eternally. His very name is a participle of the word to be. The nearest word in the English language to the word Yahweh is the word always. And God is always. The Bible never tries to prove the existence of God. It simply is a waste of time. He's there, he's always been there, and he's always going to be there. God's existence doesn't have to be explained. He's just there. What has to be explained is the existence of everything else. This is the very opposite thing to modern day thinking. The Jews in the time of Moses knew that God existed. They had seen the plagues, the Red Sea, the Egyptians drown. They knew God exists. When you've been through an experience like that, you don't need proof, you know. But modern day man needs an explanation, needs proof of God. In Hebrews chapter 11, you read two things about creation. One, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, and that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. And a little bit further on in that chapter, it says, whoever wants to find God must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those that earnestly seek him. So the Bible says, assume that he's there, and he wants you to find him, to know him, to love him, and to serve him, and then see what happens. But start by accepting in the beginning God was already there. That was really strange. I've got Runrig playing on my TV, and as that stopped, he said, in the beginning, God was there and he created the heavens and the earth. Can I get an amen? And that was really, really freaky. I don't know whether you caught it on screen or not, but I assure you that he did say that. The subject of Genesis 1 is not the creation, but rather it's the creator. It's not about how it came to be, rather than who brought it into being. In Genesis 1, God is mentioned 35 times in 31 verses. It's a picture not of a creation, but of a creator. What does it tell us about God? It says that God is personal. heart, mind and will, a personality, a personable being, a man. God is powerful. No sooner said than done. God has authority. There are 10 commandments given to our universe in Genesis. Have a look for them. God is uncreated. He's already there. He's always there. He is being. God's creative. And he has a fantastic imagination, and he creates a variety of things. There are 6,000 varieties of beetle. What artist, what an imagination. No two blades of grass are the same. No two snowflakes are the same. No two grains of sand are the same. No two people are the same. We are brilliant at creating Volkswagen Beetles, but they're all the same. And yet God creates people and sand and grass and snowflakes, and they are every single one different in their makeup. God is orderly. There is symmetry to our universe. There's mathematics to our universe. He even had a Jew that found out E equals mc squared, and that applies to the whole universe. So God is orderly. God is singular. Verbs all the way through the Genesis 1. He uses singular verbs. And God is plural. He uses nouns or naming words. And in the beginning, Elohim, God, to our translation, but in the Hebrew, Elohim. And Elohim means a God of 3 parts or more. And that is in the very, very first sentence of the Bible. Here's 3 in 1. Then he takes the rest of the Bible to explain what that means. God is good. Everything he makes is good because he is good. Evil is not part of God's creation. God is loving. He blesses those he makes. God is living. He's active in our world. God is speaking. He communicates to us. He wants to be relatable. He wants to relate to us. God is like us. We are made in his image. And not, I don't think physically we are made in his image, but spiritually we are made in his image. And God is unlike us. We can't create. We can make things out of other things, but we can't create something out of nothing. There is a distinction between creator and creation from the very beginning of the Bible. We must never identify him with what he has made. They are very distinct parts. He is not part of what he has made. He is separate from his creation. And to worship his creation is idolatry. And to worship the Creator is truth. Well, I'm going to leave it there today, and next week we get into a little bit more about Genesis. I hope you're enjoying, and if you've got any questions, please put them in the comment section below, and I will see you next week. God bless.